Hello again, everyone, and welcome back to the Underground. This is a briefing for Monday, the 4th of October, 2021, and it is being recorded on the day prior on October 3rd. So let's jump right into the weather. Weather over the next 12 hours is not going to be super great for any kind of aerial asset. As we can see, most of the eastern United States is going to have significant cloud coverage at very low altitudes, as well as some of those medium and higher level altitudes as well. And also the Pacific Northwest is also going to be hit with some of those winter weather type systems. Moving forward into the later parts of the year, it's a good idea to understand not just the cloud levels and the cloud ceilings that occur at low altitudes. Those are good to understand and keep an eye out for, or at least get into the habit of. But it's also good to understand freezing levels and where the freezing levels are located and these different kinds of atmospheric conditions that might affect any aviation asset when it comes to things like icing. We're also in a red illumination cycle, with lunar illumination being roughly at 11% or so. So the low lunar illumination means dark nights, and moving into the later parts of the year, we've got really long nights. We've got a lot more hours of darkness combined with really significant layers of cloud coverage and icing. Man, it just really adds up to sort of understand that this is most certainly Charlie's weather when it comes to any kind of aerial asset. And like I mentioned, up in the northern parts of the country, we're starting to already see some very poor visibility up at altitude when it comes to things like precipitation and other kinds of storm systems moving into the area as we move forward into the later parts of the year. Moving on to NOTAMs, really only two of note. Of course, they're both presidential. The first one is in Lansing, Michigan. I haven't done the research to figure out what this one is. Probably some kind of visit from either the president or the vice president. And the second one is in Wilmington, Delaware. That is the standard vacation ops NOTAM that we've been tracking for months now. For this weekend, so usually probably by the time this brief goes out and goes hot, it's going to be canceled. So, just so everybody knows. And for the civil unrest forecast, really not a whole lot. Really no main changes to this slide. The election audit is still going on. We're gonna have to wait and see exactly how that all shakes out. There's a lot of speculation, a lot of talking about the election audit online, and we're definitely still in wait and see mode when it comes to that particular event. Moving into logistics, a quick rundown of the shortages from last time. So the school bus shortages have gotten worse. I've only left the two icons on the map, which I'll explain in just a minute, but most states are dealing with a significant school bus driver shortage at this point, which is why I have listed it on the left-hand side of the slide. So for those that don't understand, the left-hand side of the slide, that sort of box there shows the shortages that are present for every state. If I were to drop those icons on every state, you wouldn't be able to see the map. So I've put them over off to the side. That is not a legend for the icons that are on the map. I'm speaking to the icons on the map. If I were to put a legend for every icon that I'm using, I have over 4,000 icons right now. So it would take kind of a long time and a lot of slide space to actually put all the icons up there. But there's two icons that are on the states of Massachusetts and Ohio. I left those there because they seem to be having the worst time of it when it comes to the school bus shortages, particularly because Massachusetts has activated their National Guard and Ohio looks like they are getting ready to activate their National Guard. But we'll come back to that in just a second. And the reason that I wanted to talk about the school bus driver shortage particularly is because of a sort of new development in that field. So we've done a lot of digging and gotten a lot of feedback from a lot of people via email and DMs that indicate to us that a large portion of the people in some areas aren't exactly quitting being school bus drivers. They're actually being fired from being school bus drivers due to medical mandates. Now, this turns out to be almost impossible to verify, at least in any way, as to make a broad statement about it. So if you do your own homework on this, just know that there are almost certainly several reasons for the school bus driver shortage. From our own analysis, there seem to be a few main reasons that people are not choosing to be bus drivers. Firstly, people cannot continue the job due to money. Now, even within this category, there are widely different reasons. Some bus drivers are currently being paid a lot of money. Some people might say they're being overpaid for the hours that they're working, but they feel that they can make more money elsewhere, so they're quitting. or they like the idea of bending over the education system to use this as an opportunity, the leverage to make even more money. And on the other end of the spectrum, some people are genuinely being paid practically nothing, so they genuinely have to change careers just to put food on the table, because being a bus driver requires a schedule that isn't really conducive to most other 9 to 5 jobs. On the medical/political side of the house, there are also people that are primarily concerned with the medical mandates and they're just fed up with the whole thing, so they quit. And others are outright being fired for not complying with the needle based tyranny, right? So there are a lot of different factors playing into these school bus driver shortages that are affecting pretty much every state at this point. Also, the water shortage out west has gotten status quo on that, really. It's still bad. As we move forward into the winter and we start getting a lot of precipitation from the winter weather, we'll see how this works out. But just know that, of course, the people living in these areas know the water shortage is pretty dire. But for people who aren't living there, the water shortage has been an issue for honestly months and months and months at this point. So that continues to be a major concern for people living out west. Also, the microchip shortage has gotten quite a bit worse. We've added a couple of states there, as you can see. Really, these microchip shortages are they're at a point where it's very, very concerning. And it's starting to affect a lot of consumer goods. So, mostly it seems like the automobile industry has hit some of the hardest, but we're also starting to see these microchip shortages trickle down into individual consumer goods. Basically, anything that takes a microchip is going to have some kind of shortage at this point. As to how severe that shortage is, who knows? You might not even notice it, or you might not be able to buy a pickup truck in, in the entire country in a few months. We just don't know how bad this is going to be, but we do know that it is absolutely worth keeping an eye on, and it's going to be a very significant thing as we move forward into the future. Also, much like the school bus driver shortage, we're also seeing a shortage of public transit drivers for much the same reasons or the array of different reasons. A lot of cities have reported severe, severe shortages of public transit drivers. So we're just calling that as being a nationwide problem at the moment. And finally, really, the only other addition is a sort of brief follow on to last brief, which is when I mentioned Costco's shortages of toilet paper and bottled water. Um, Now, I mentioned last time that the shortages at Costco of toilet paper and bottled water made no sense whatsoever because there was really nothing to indicate that these shortages were happening, right? Remember during the great toilet paper shortage fiasco during the height of this whole pandemic thing, um, the reason for that was social media hysteria. Really, the main reason driving the driving that shortage was a news article getting spun, people freaking out, and then it just snowballed into it causing genuine shortages because everybody went out and panic bought toilet paper uh, because social media told them to. Now, this time, it turns out Costco's prayers have been answered because a few days after Costco announced the toilet paper shortages, this study from Japan came out. It turns out a Japanese study was done showing a brand new symptom of the virus, which is probably the sketchiest thing ever. That this virus might cause some gastrointestinal problems. So if you look at the timing of this, it's very interesting. I don't know if there's any link or not, but I just thought it was kind of funny that Costco announces there's toilet paper shortages, and then like 2 days later, Japan releases a study, this ridiculous like sounding study, which makes really no sense. Even if you're not, even if you don't have a medical background like us, it doesn't make any sense whatsoever. So of course, even the New York Post right there is sensationalizing this as much as they possibly can. So the bottom line is that it doesn't really matter at this point if it is a manufactured shortage, somebody just trying to make a quick dollar off of people's stupidity online, or if it's a genuine shortage due to people actually being concerned and going out and rushing to buy things. There's going to be shortages of things like toilet paper and other random things because, as we all know, when people rush to a store to go buy something in a panic, they tend to buy other things as well. And as we all know, our grocery stores and our logistical networks can't handle that demand all at once. So it's just like, on game day in a big, football town or a big college town, they're going to be completely out of a lot of random things, right? Usually the alcohol section will be completely cleared out along with the snacks section. So expect a similar type of thing to happen, because this is just getting spun way out of control on all of social media and all of these so-called journalistic agencies. So I thought that was interesting to touch on. And moving into critical infrastructure concerns, really, I wanted to leave the Crystal Valley ransomware attack on there from last time. Really, there have been no major updates from the last brief about the Crystal Valley attack. Several mainstream media outlets have reportedly reached out to Crystal Valley several times in the past day or so and haven't really gotten any response. So we don't know if this attack is resolved, and we don't know if it is still going on. So I just wanted to leave it on there to show that it probably still is. There's still some impacts that are occurring because of that attack. Also, moving on to number 2 there, bandwidth.com, the company Bandwidth, which is, a confusing name as a company, but Bandwidth is actually the company name of a newer company, but they are a very large provider of VoIP services, so voice over IP services. And they have a lot of clients. Everyone from Verizon to local 911 dispatching operations run their telecommunications networks through services that are provided by Bandwidth. So even though this attack was stopped quite quickly. Bandwidth.com announced that they had mitigated the impacts of this quite quickly. So they didn't really get very deep into the systems of how Bandwidth works and things like that. But since Bandwidth has such a wide breadth of services that they provide, there were very widespread impacts felt from this cyber attack. So again, it really just shows the vulnerability of our telecommunications networks to things like cyber attacks. Even if they're stopped very quickly, the fact that we're so networked and one single company and one single set of servers can impact the entire country. So this is a great example of that. And then moving on to number 3, the shipping situation when it comes to the port congestion and things like that has gotten quite worse. There is currently still significant shipping congestion, and it has spread to most of the ports in the United States. As we briefed last time, the Port of Los Angeles was the most heavy hit and has had to divert cargo ships to offload as far north as Vancouver. Actually, we can see right here, these are the ships that are actually, they haven't been diverted north to Vancouver. These are just some of the ones that are still there, hanging out outside of Los Angeles, waiting to offload. As we can see, there's quite a lot that are sitting there waiting. So shipping on the East Coast is also affected, with thousands of ships being at anchor outside ports waiting to unload or being diverted elsewhere. And again, for anyone who doesn't understand why this is such a big problem, the short version is that our national and even global logistics networks have always had serious problems. Our logistical systems barely work as is. But because barely working is still technically working, very few people care or pay attention to things like this. So when you take a system that is just barely chugging along and just barely functioning, and you increase demand sharply, well, the logistical networks can't handle it anymore, which is a huge problem. And since everything is so interconnected, since our logistical transport capacity is so small compared to the amount of goods that need to be shipped, you have a lot of random shortages happen. There's only so much space, so there's an opportunity cost for each load of cargo, right? And the choice of shipping one item over another can make a huge difference. Simply one ship unloading its cargo before another ship, or one train taking one less freight car than it could, will result in localized shortages of random goods in random places around the country. And for significant governmental actions, not a lot of great news this time. So up first there, New York has begun the process of terminating doctors for not complying with the medical mandates, and in turn has activated thousands of National Guard soldiers to assist with the personnel shortages that are a direct result of this. So New York is freely admitting that they have created this crisis, and they are perfectly fine with that arrangement because they're calling in soldiers to fill the gaps. So we'll come back to that one in just a second when it comes to the National Guard deployments. But And moving on to number 2 there, as expected, another round of purges from social media has begun, with YouTube itself announcing that they will be outright deleting videos and content that goes against the regime's narrative on the medical procedure that cannot be named. So we're in a really tough spot, because the regime is coming out and stating in places like the actual manufacturers of these medical substances are coming out and stating a lot of stuff, and they're being quite open about how ineffective this stuff is. Like, for instance, the CDC director, Rochelle Walensky, just the other day stated that the jab cannot prevent transmission. You've got places like Webster's and dictionary and the CDC changing the definition of that V word online so that it's no longer the same word as before. So we're in this really weird spot where the regime is freely admitting that this stuff is really just about control and totalitarian, things like that, but YouTube still wants to take up for them. So we can't even show the regime talking about the regime's own ideology, which is strange. So, um, yeah, again, pardon us for having to talk in code so much. That is really the only thing that is keeping us from getting outright deleted from YouTube at this point. So, I guess we're just going for confusing the algorithms instead of trying to go against them, I guess. But in any case, I should mention that we here back up all of our videos to Odysee, which is in the description, just like always. So I thought I should mention that YouTube, if you have another YouTube channel that you like, um, and they're definitely questioning the regime's narrative, even though the regime itself is questioning the narrative in a lot of cases, YouTube is probably going to delete them. So you can, of course, there are a lot of third-party websites which will allow you to take the link of a YouTube video and download the video. So I would recommend that for any videos that you find that are particularly interesting on YouTube. We do that with our own videos just to make sure that we've got everything backed up separately on all kinds of different drives and stuff. So I just thought I should point that out as well. Moving on to number 3, Milley, the chairman of the Joint Chiefs of Staff, testified before Congress. He was called to testify based on, well, I guess the allegations of treason. But as far as his actual testimony goes, you can actually, watch it, download it, whatever, if you want. There's really not much intel value with this other than Milley doubling down on everything, confirming that he did in fact commit treason. But the sticking point is that what everyone else calls treason, he calls doing his job. So again, there's not really much to learn here. It's just interesting to note. And it is very important, I think, in a larger aspect, to keep in mind the mindset and the political ideology of senior military leadership as we move forward into an age of military deployments on U.S. soil, which I will talk about in just a bit. Moving on to number 4, even more concrete proof has come to light that confirms the Biden regime is preventing Americans from getting back home from Afghanistan. You can read the specific details yourself, but the Biden regime, particularly the State Department, has a long track record at this point of preventing U.S. citizens from getting home, but also allowing non-SIV and non-green card holding Afghan refugees to wander unguarded around U.S. military bases. So this is a much larger story. A lot of people have done a lot better job at covering this development than us, because I think that there's a lot of journalistic value there, but there's not really a whole lot to analyze for us other than, yeah, this is a concern and we need to watch out for this stuff. But really, when it comes to national level policy and what the federal government is doing, best thing we can do is watch, unfortunately, with a lot of this refugee type stuff. So again, something that we've talked about a lot already. I just wanted to provide yet another example of the regime's behavior on this for posterity's sake, I guess. And number 5, finally, the infrastructure bill is back in the press for some reason, which is perplexing to us because we and hundreds of other entities covered this months ago when the infrastructure bill was introduced. But for some reason, this tax per mile program is drawing outrage once again, even though it probably should have been drawing outrage months ago. So here it is. This is an actual screenshot of the issue in question, the per mile tax on citizens pilot program. Again, don't just take our word for it or our screenshots that could easily be doctored. You can actually read the full document itself. The link is in the sources after this. But this clearly outlines the creation of a per mile tax on all drivers eventually nationwide. Now, currently, as this bill is written, this is a pilot program. But anyone with any common sense can see the language of this pilot program is to establish infrastructure to actually work out the logistics of how to tax people. Clearly, this feasibility study is really just instituting the creation of this logistical system, which we think will almost immediately not be a pilot program, but a full-on thing. Or they'll just keep calling it a pilot program decades into the future after every single vehicle in the United States has a tracker in it. Now, interestingly, this bill also highlights how they plan to do it. Right here. As we can clearly see, there will be trackers placed in your car, the cars of the pilot program participants. Now, we can get into the weeds of how this will work when the bill passes, and we kind of get the first ideas of what kinds of tracking devices they will use. Also, as we pointed out months ago, they honestly don't even need to have tracking devices in everyone's car. All they need is a network of automated license plate readers, which are networked with law enforcement IT networks so that you won't be able to drive on the road without your plate being flagged as not being registered under this system. And considering that the funding for this is $10 million, it's really hard to tell where that money is going to go. It doesn't say in the bill. I'm showing you probably 90% of the text of the bill as it's written. So it's hard to say as to how this will actually work out. It's basically just a blank check of $10 million to set this system up. And again, a slight digression to kind of put things in perspective. We here always try to balance what we call the freak out point, for lack of a better term. Conveying exactly how concerned to be is always difficult. It is really almost impossible to convey the sense of urgency to someone who is not an expert in a particular field. Sometimes it's just easier to tell people when it's worth freaking out over something. Our classic example of this is that if I were out and about walking around town and I just happened to see a bomb disposal technician in full kit and everything sprinting away from something, uh, I don't even care what's going on. I'm going to break all land speed records to outpace them, even though I have no idea what's going on. I'm just going to assume that there's something that I don't understand that's going on, and I'm going to defer to that trusted expert until I can figure out what's up and make my own decisions. So, when it comes to stuff like this, the US government literally telling you that they are going to put tracking devices in your vehicle, we would recommend having the same level of concern as if the government told you that they were putting a tracking device in your vehicle. Yes, this is a volunteer pilot program, but we can all assess how that's going to go. There's nothing so permanent as a temporary government program. Also, this program is voluntary. Yes, the US government seems to think that people are going to line up to voluntarily pay taxes on each mile they drive. I mean, I guess this is good news for the folks that are fans of voluntarism. This is an outstanding way to see how that's going to work out. But my own personal assessment is that this voluntary pilot program will be about as voluntary as the medical mandates are. The good news is that the U.S. government tracking every person's vehicle in the U.S. is going to be a massive logistical nightmare. It will be easy to defeat, easy to just say no to, and almost impossible to enforce. Plus, most people go out of their way to hide their income and avoid paying taxes anyway. And even then, it is highly unlikely that the US government reaches a point in which they will be able to send a SWAT team to your specific house because you unplugged your tracking chip. Sure, they can get big names and the resistance leadership, but they can't get everyone. And the US government already has a hard enough time getting everyone to pay their taxes as is. Yeah, this is a gateway to some really horrifically bad stuff, but it's also something that we can easily fight. So hopefully that explains what we think the appropriate level of concern is over this particular governmental action. It is worth being aware of and definitely worth taking concrete steps to disrupt, deny, and dismantle these systems once we get an understanding of exactly how this is going to work out. But for now, there really isn't much that's worth completely freaking out over. And I go out of the way to over explain the appropriate freak out level, or the appropriate level of concern to have because of the next slide. I am sure that this slide will get screenshot and posted all around the internet and it will probably set the comment section on fire, but since we've mostly really stopped reading comments, I just wanted to show you some of the most significant troop deployments around the country since there seem to be quite a lot. And as governors activate their National Guard units, the American public is having a lot of interaction with the National Guard in a lot of areas. So we thought it would be handy for people to know what's going on and where these units are located, just in case someone sees a convoy or something, or walks into a hospital and sees it staffed with soldiers. We get a lot of messages from people who see military units moving around, which are almost always units just going to training or something. But again, with so many Guard units deployed around the country, I thought it would be helpful to start covering this. There are probably tens of thousands of National Guard troops deployed around the country for anything from wildfire response to helping stock food banks and other genuinely good and decent missions. So keep in mind that this slide only shows the deployments that we think might be helpful to know about, because a lot of these states have really not been good about letting their populations know that their local hospitals are now staffed with soldiers. And as far as symbology goes, I'm sorry if this looks atrocious. I just tried to go for a blend of something like, Mill Standard 2525 and something that blends a little bit better. So moving on to the most significant one, which is Massachusetts. So in Massachusetts, the 26th Maneuver Enhancement Brigade of the Massachusetts National Guard, they're the unit that is providing soldiers to drive kids to school for this school bus driver shortage. As far as how many soldiers are actually being deployed for this, the numbers are not clear at the moment. We know several hundred at least, but we're thinking probably more than that. So for right now, I'm just keeping it at the brigade level just until we have an understanding of how many are actually out there driving these school buses and vans and such. And moving on to New York, the largest deployment by far for the entire United States is most likely going to be the New York 42nd Infantry Division. So again, keeping the symbology there of a division, we don't know how many people from the 42nd will be deployed. Most likely it will be the 122nd Medical Battalion along with others, but again, they're not deployed. They're just, the dashed outline there indicates projected unit positions. So yeah, they're going to be deploying a considerable amount of troops to staff hospitals. Now, again, they're most likely not going to have enough doctors, so they're going to probably deploy a lot of infantry soldiers as well in order to fill other staff roles like cleaning and food services and things like that. So when a lot of these states say they're deploying their National Guard, a lot of times they're not even deploying medical personnel, or the medical personnel that they had have already been deployed. So a lot of these National Guard units are deploying infantry assets or some kind of engineering assets for various support roles and things like that. Moving on down to Texas, the 36th Infantry Division, really just elements of that division, mostly the 72nd Brigade Combat Team and the 11th Medical Battalion. They're down there supporting the enduring border mission, which Texas is calling Operation Lone Star. Other states have sent small elements of National Guard soldiers down to the border as well. But it's really hard to track all of them because we're talking thousands of soldiers at this point is down there on the border. So once we have a better understanding as to where and which units are down there, we'll provide that update as well. Jumping back to Ohio, several school districts have actually requested the governor activate the National Guard to help with the shortage of school bus drivers as well. And the governor has signaled that they will be doing this. And press statements confirm that hundreds of soldiers are currently being trained to drive buses and other vehicles. So again, this deployment is projected, so we don't have any specific units just yet. Moving down to the rest of the South, Alabama, a really small element, probably a dozen or so doctors, nurses, and medics are helping out local hospitals down there. Georgia, same thing, slightly more people, about a company-sized element of soldiers have been called up to be spread across about a dozen hospitals throughout the state of Georgia. And also the similar situation in South Carolina, just a small handful of troops deployed. Really, those are just medical-only troops, maybe about a platoon's worth, spread around the entire state. Moving out west to Wyoming, their governor reported that they have roughly 200 people hospitalized with the virus at the moment. So he has activated about 100 soldiers to be spread across hospitals in 16 cities around the state. Montana, similar story, about a company's worth of soldiers are being deployed at about half a dozen hospitals around the state. And moving back to Kentucky, a little bit more nefarious reporting coming from Kentucky. It looks like Kentucky is having the same situation that New York might be having. We've been receiving reports that Kentucky hospitals have been firing and replacing hospital personnel with National Guard soldiers for months now. Again, that's really hard to verify because we can't tell. We're not exactly getting termination papers in our inboxes for each person that's fired, so we can't tell exactly down to the ground what's actually going on. I'm just saying that this is what we've been seeing reported around social media kind of a lot. So since there's enough of people talking about it, I just wanted to point out that, right now there's about a battalion's worth of soldiers scattered around most major hospitals in the state. And it looks like most of them are coming from the 149th MEB. And wrapping things up with Oregon, Oregon has been really proactive, I should say, about deploying their National Guard troops for pretty much any reason. So they've activated the Air National Guard, several thousand soldiers from different components of National Guard units all around the state to support local hospitals. So it's really kind of hard to figure out what kind of personnel are going to places, but it seems like it's mostly just your infantry MOSs from either the Air National Guard, however they do things, and how the Army does things. Basically saying it's not medical personnel. It's largely not medical personnel that are being deployed, because the medical personnel for Oregon's National Guard units have already been deployed for months now. So really, they're just calling up thousands more troops to fill supporting roles. Hopefully, that's helpful in understanding the largest deployments around the country. I know I missed a lot of deployments here and there, but this takes a lot of time to research. Combing through official PAO websites or social media or each state's executive orders, it just takes a while to compile all of this data. And usually, when a National Guard mission goes down, it'll happen, and then people will forget about it. So even though soldiers are deployed for months to some location, after a couple of weeks, the news stops caring about it. So now we're having to go back and dig up news articles talking about a specific unit being deployed months ago, even though they're still there. So really hard to do. And it's hard to categorize all this information and make sure that it actually is as accurate as possible. So as time goes on, we'll hopefully have even more data to go off of. And moving forward into the K through 12 public school mask mandates, really the biggest update from last briefing is South Carolina. So South Carolina has entered into a confusing legal mess. So here's what we've got. We have the South Carolina Supreme Court ruling that masks cannot be mandated, which gave huge legal support to the mask mandate ban. But a federal judge came in and halted the mask mandate ban. After that, the governor said that the state would appeal it to the U.S. Supreme Court. So we have a combination of many things happening. The South Carolina Supreme Court says that masks cannot be mandated, and a federal judge said that the mask mandate bans are halted, which are two separate things. And the South Carolina Supreme Court, based on the opinion that was written on their earlier decision, makes it extremely unlikely that they will go against the federal court ruling. But the governor and the legislature clearly is going against the federal judge by announcing lawsuits and things like that. Oh, and on top of all of this, all of the school districts all over the state are just making up their own rules at this point. You could have a kid going to school in one district and be living a pretty normal life, well, as normal as to be expected from the public school system, but a kid who lives across the street in a different district is engaged in a very tyrannical situation. So, of course, people who live in South Carolina have much more knowledge about this than we do, but just for people living in other states, South Carolina's situation is a good way to illustrate just how complex the public school situation has become. And also Kentucky, a slight error that I missed. Kentucky originally, months ago, had a mask mandate statewide, right? No exceptions, right? But the state legislature overturned that executive order last month. However, after digging around, we found that 96% of all the school districts in Kentucky have a mask mandate. So, yeah, the mandate got overturned, but almost all school districts have kept the mandate. So, I thought that was worth keeping Kentucky red on the map. So, just so you know. And for the jab mandates, California has announced that Gavin Newsom announced that California will be making the jab mandatory for all K through 12 students, no exceptions, in all school districts moving forward. I don't think it's actually occurred just yet, but it's making the rounds on all the usual sites this morning. So I thought I'd mention it. And also, just as a reminder, that usually when something happens in California of a tyrannical nature, it makes its way to other states as well. So my guess is probably New York is going to do the same. Or something similar, along with a smattering of other very historically tyrannical states, particularly if they have the same political leadership that they had during the initial crisis. So, really, that's the only update for this slide. And overall, really no change to what we're seeing with regards to individual states' resistance to the medical mandates. I guess we're still in just wait and see mode when it comes to what states are going to do when it comes to lawsuits and things like that. So we'll see, and we'll update this as time goes on. And for international issues this time, up first are Iran and Azerbaijan. So tensions are quite high in the region at the moment. Azerbaijan has been getting quite cozy with Israel lately, actually over the past few years. So the Israelis have sold Azerbaijan quite literally hundreds of millions of dollars in weapons and other defense technologies, which has obviously made the Iranians quite upset to have a sort of quasi-military defense ally to to Israel on their northern border. So Iran is currently holding the first ever military exercise on the border with Azerbaijan, which Azerbaijan has reciprocated by holding exercises on their side of the border. So classic tit for tat military deployment story. I guess we'll see how this goes as we move forward into the next few weeks. Moving on to North Korea, just a quick update. The missile that they launched back on the 30th of September was a new SAM system, turns out. So for those of you keeping score at home, that makes it the fourth completely new missile system that North Korea has launched in just the past couple of weeks. So they are really pulling out all the stops to keep up with the shows of force that Japan and South Korea have been conducting. So that arms race is probably going to continue to increase as time goes on. But North Korea has got to be running out of new systems to test, considering that their economy it's North Korea's economy, right? So it's not like they're have a whole lot of extra stuff just lying around, right? And moving down to Australia, a bit of good news coming out of New South Wales. Their premier, Gladys Berejiklian, has resigned due to a corruption scandal. So this corruption scandal is separate from the medical tyranny stuff that's made her famous. Berejiklian has a very long history of being tied up in financial scandals. And in this case, it stems from her having a secret relationship with a member of parliament who was the center of a years-long massive bribery scandal. So she has stepped down to distance herself from this, and I guess we'll see how this works out with the whole corruption thing. Not really sure how this is going to go as we move forward. And moving back to China, so China has been at it again with their flying their aircraft into Taiwan's airspace. So for those of you who've been following us, welcome to our world. It does seem like it happens quite a lot. China has been flying aircraft into Taiwan's ADAs for decades now, I guess. So it's nothing new. It's just that we try to keep note of things when they happen to be pretty big flights. And this time it was 25 aircraft. So that's usually about the number of aircraft they fly when China's really super mad at Taiwan over something. China's trying to both bully Taiwan and expand their territory and their control of the South China Sea and stuff like that. This is probably going to be a staple for the next foreseeable future as the tensions between Taiwan and China continue to increase. And finally, the United Kingdom. They just a quick update from last time. The UK has actually activated their military to get fuel to where it's needed. So, like I mentioned last time, it's not so much a shortage of fuel, so much as it is a shortage of fuel truck drivers, which again is for a lot of different reasons. But it's to the point now where the military is involved, which is never really a good thing when it comes to the logistics of things. So anytime the military gets involved to help move supplies around in a country, it means that the civilian networks have failed. So that's not good, right? So hopefully they'll be able to get the trucking shortage under control very soon and go back to a normal type system. But yeah, we're definitely going to keep our eyes on this as time moves on. So that's really all I've got for today. I know a lot of data being thrown out today and a lot of really boring and monotonous stuff, but hey, this stuff can't always be entertaining, unfortunately. But thank you for those of you that stuck around so far, and thank you again to all of our Patreon supporters who have really helped us out quite a lot as we move forward. So here are your slides for today. I know I decreased the font size. Sorry if you have a hard time reading that. But as always, you can get these slides from our Odysee page, the link of which is in the description. So a lot of information is packed down in our description box, which we would highly recommend everybody checking out. So that's it for today. Thanks again for watching, and we'll see you next time. And as always, fight in the shade.